Welcome back to the Money Talks podcast. My name is Mike Campbell, and I wish you and your family all the best luck in 2022. You know what? And when it comes to our finances, many of us are going to need all the luck we can muster in a year that's going to see higher interest rates, for example. How much higher? Well, I'll discuss in a moment with Dr. Michael Berry, who's actually presented to the Federal Reserve. I'll talk to Ozzie about a new proposal to tax your home. You heard that right, tax your home. Michael Levy's on the growing electric car push and what it means to Tesla. Integrated Wealth Management, by the way, Andrew Rulin, he's going to drop by to tell us what he sees for 2022 and what you should be doing within your portfolio. Plus, I've got Victor Adair, of course, from the trading desk. But one forecast from our year in review special that's already playing out is higher prices for a huge variety of goods and services. Gasoline hit a record high in Vancouver this week. I mean, we've been warning about higher food and energy prices and energy costs, since February 2020 Outlook Conference. I mean, if you're a regular listener to Money Talks, then you know the two are very related because natural gas is a key feedstock for making nitrogen fertilizers like ammonia, urea, and nitrates. A connection, you know what? Many climate change advocates show no sign they understand. I mean, the massive increase in natural gas prices in Europe's already forced fertilizer prices to skyrocket, while some manufacturers have curtailed production. Both are going to negatively impact crop yields. And by the way, if you do actually understand that relationship, then my guess is that you do know more than people like David Suzuki, Greta Thunberg, or maybe even our prime minister, because I can't believe they knowingly push policies that guarantee higher energy prices that increase the worries over starvation in emerging market countries, already making life difficult for low-income families in the developed world. That's the harsh reality, whether we like it or not, and it should be part of the context for any discussion on eliminating fossil fuels before an alternative energy grid's readily available. I mean, we'll talk a lot more about that and rising energy prices over the next couple of years. So let me come back to food. We're already paying 20% more for bacon, apples, other food items compared to last year. We already know that the dairy commissions mandated the cost of milk to rise 8.4%, cost of butter 12.4% this year. The Dalhousie Agri-Food Analytics Lab forecasts that the average family of four in Canada is going to have to fork over an extra $966 for food this year. And that's with after-tax dollars. And that's a point I want to make clearly to you. It's something I encourage everyone to take into account. It's not just an extra $966. No, the average Canadian first has to earn about $1,500 more than you pay the income tax just to have that money left over to pay for that extra for food as they did last year. That's the starting point, by the way, for the increased cost of living for 2022. We're all going to have food increases, so that's our floor. Now, how long inflation continues is still hotly debated, relying on things like the impact of more financial stimulus or maybe Omicron or supply chain issues. And of course, we'll be here to chronicle it. But there's one area I want to bring to your attention today, and that is the increasing costs that are a direct result of government. Well, of course, they don't want us talking about this one. For example, in the year in review special, I talked about the biggest jump in mandatory Canada pension plan contributions, biggest since 1992. Right now, the percentage of your earnings is going to jump. They'll take 5.7% on all earnings up to $64,900. That, by the way, is a jump also. But in other words, you're going to pay a higher percentage on an increased amount of your earnings. Bottom line, every worker is going to pay more, maybe as much as $334, especially tough for self-employed. It's double that, $668, because they pay both the employer and employee portion. Employment insurance premiums are also going up. Yeah, it's only $63 this year, but now that grand total could be as much as $953 off your paycheck for the year for anyone making about $55,000 or more. But no matter what you earn, you're going to be paying more. Electricity, natural gas rates are going up. Now, you got to check where you live to see the size of the increase, but it's probably going to be something in the neighborhood of at least $100 for the year, again, after tax dollars. Check out your property tax bill. Now, maybe the most egregious I've seen in the country is Vancouver. Property tax is 6.3%, but it doesn't matter where you live. Your property tax is going to be on an increased assessed value of your home. It's not on last year's value. It's going to probably be up, something like 20%, much more in some areas. Rent freezes, well, they've been lifted, it seems like, across the country now. So there's going to be an increase for renters, maybe in the neighborhood of 1.5%, 2%. Depends on where you live, though. Again, you pay rent, though, with after-tax dollars. How about the carbon tax going up April 1st, $50 a ton? Well, that will translate to about 11 cents a liter at the pump. Now, there are rebates. You look at the formula, difference in each province. But here's the thing. BC has no rebate. So 80% of the population doesn't get one. It's just an extra cost. I mean, there's lots of smaller things the government's throwing in, things like consumers paying 25 cents for a disposable cup at your favorite coffee place. Minimum charge of 15 cents going to be applied to paper bags, and reusable shopping bags are going to cost a minimum of $1. I mean, there's more stuff like that, but it's the Canadian government's version of death by 1,000 cuts, and it's going to cause tremendous hardship for some families and individuals. And one more thing, final word. We're entering a period where, for our own protection, we simply can't afford to ignore economics and finance. I mean, we never could. But now the impact of government policy, as I've just alluded to, in the form of higher prices, just for the basics, is going to be more direct than ever. I mean, come on, Europe's giving us a vivid example right now with the dramatic rise in energy costs. You know what? Consumers in Europe are going to pay about $540 billion extra dollars this year alone. As Ronald Reagan famously said, the 9 scariest words in the English language: I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Hey, we've got a lot more coming in your show. As I alluded to, Ozzie is going to chat about a new proposal they're floating to see about taxing your home, your primary residence. I've got Dr. Michael Berry will chat interest rates and inflation. I've got Andrew Rulin talking about your portfolio. I've got Victor Adair from the trading desk. Mike Levy's going to join me in a few moments. Plus, of course, I've got a shocking stat, a quote of the week. Here's my hint. It's on the CBC. And of course, we got a Goofy Award. We're at a 1-year anniversary of an infamous event. I'll chat more about that, but it's all right here on the podcast for Money Talks. Time now for the quote of the week. But first, a little context. To say spending $1.5 billion tax dollars on the CBC is controversial, well, that's an understatement. But even more so over the past few years, where accusations of bias in favor of the government has been rampant. I mean, for example, after watching the CBC's Rosemary Barton's exclusive interview with Canada's Chief Health Officer, Theresa Tam, former BC NDP Premier Ujjal Dosanjh tweeted in quotes, "Such softball interviews do make people wonder about the journalistic independence of the CBC." Well, with all due respect to the former Premier, I'm not sure how many are left wondering. Come on, the CBC's bias has been the subject of criticism on so many occasions, especially since the Prime Minister surprised the CBC itself following the Liberals' 2015 election victory with a promise of an additional $675 million tax dollars over 5 years, 5 times what they had promised during the campaign. Now, with ratings and ad revenue dropping, there's talk of more tax dollars forthcoming. I mean, the accusations of bias certainly aren't helped by the fact that the Canadian Media Guild, that's a union representing 6,000 journalists, including reporters from the CBC and the Canadian press, along with Unifor, that's CBC's biggest union. Well, they've registered as third-party participants in the federal election so that they could spend big dollars on anti-conservative ads. And maybe the capper for the CBC's breathtakingly silly move during the 2019 election to sue the Conservative Party during the election simply for using a few seconds of CBC footage of the leaders' debate in an online ad. Then they initially filed the suit and included their main election anchor, Rosemary Barton, and reporter John Paul Tasker. Well, that destroys their credibility. And that all is the context for my quote of the week by Tara Henley. She resigned from the CBC in December after 8 years on the job, and she stated this week in quotes, "When I started at the National Public Broadcaster in 2013, the network produced some of the best journalism in the country. By the time I resigned last month, it embodied some of the worst trends in mainstream media. In a short period of time, the CBC went from being a trusted source of news to churning out clickbait that reads like a parody of the student press," end of quote. She went on to write on Substack.com in quotes, "To work at the CBC in the current climate is to embrace cognitive dissonance and to abandon journalistic integrity," end of quote. Arguably more troubling when she stated, It is to consent to the idea that a growing list of subjects are off the table, that dialogue itself can be harmful, that the big issues of our time are already settled. It is to capitulate to certainty, shut down critical thinking, to stamp out curiosity. Wow. Sadly, I nodded when I read that. I think I was an early commentator in the fact that there was a growing list of subjects that were off the table, which now include, but not limited to, just as examples, climate change, critical race theory, government COVID policy. But perhaps the most dangerous thing she observed is shutting down critical thinking. Now, I know many in the mainstream media seem to have made a choice to more closely monitor being a stenographer rather than critical thinking reporting. But the irony is this, is that it sows the seeds for their own demise. Well, this is absolutely perfect timing. I wish I had this timing in the market all the time to get people like Dr. Michael Berry on the line with me, who, 14 years he was doing morning news, but he's been with Discovery Investing. He's now with BlackBerry doing resource development in Mexico. But he's also presented in front of the Federal Reserve Board and watches the interest rate scenario there very closely. So I thought, what a great time to get a chance to chat with him in this kind of an environment. Dr. Berry, first of all, thank you for taking the time. But let me start with this, as I was just looking at, the report that the market right now is pricing in a rate increase in March, maybe as many as 3 and 4 rate increases. Can you give us a little context on what you see happening?
Yes, I can. I'm probably not going to, spout the same stuff that's coming out of Washington. The Fed is way behind the curve. The U.S. Fed is way behind the curve of controlling inflation, and I'm not convinced that that's not the way they want to be, because I think inflation is the one way that the Fed is going to have to solve some of its problems. I mean, since 2008, we've been printing money like crazy and doing all kinds of unusual things with respect to the money supply and the economy. And so I do guess we'll have 3, or they're telling us we'll have 3 interest rate increases this year, probably the first one in March. I think January 27th is the meeting, is the big Fed meeting. But the equity market is already pricing in 1 or more interest rate increases. The yield curve is starting to price those in as well. You can see that today, and you could sort of see the last couple of weeks, the NASDAQ in particular, the high-tech stuff has just been creamed. And it's very sensitive to higher interest rates. So for a long time, we were told interest rates are going to be low forever, and it's going to go through 2022 and 2023, and don't worry about it. We're going to keep interest rates low. It looks now like they would rather do that, but they can't. They've got to raise rates, and that's going to have a pretty dramatic effect on the equity markets, definitely on the equity markets. These have been great equity markets for the last 8 years. I mean, it's been really good stuff. So much so that a lot of people in the United States have decided to retire because they have Bitcoin and they have mem things going on in their portfolios. And I think it's all going to be brought to a stop very quickly. But yes, interest rates are going up. They're already being priced in, and we expect to see 3 interest rate increases by the Federal Reserve this year.
And, obviously that impacts people on such a direct basis in their personal finances. They're on a variable rate loan. We do have record amounts of personal debt, record amounts of government debt. So right there. And as you say, we've already got a hint from the NASDAQ exchange with its declines that it's not very happy with the prospect, anticipating, as you say, maybe 3 hikes this coming year. So it's a key subject. Let me jump back to inflation for a second. I'm with you. I think the Federal Reserve actually and the governments benefit from inflation to help them get out of their debt problem. But at the same time, it's going to be negative politically, it looks like, for governments in power, because people don't like paying a lot more for things. And we're certainly doing that. And I keep talking about that side of it. But I'm just wondering, they got the inflation thing wrong, I think. I think they seem to be surprised that you're talking in the States, for example, 6% inflation. And again, that's not an exact measurement. Certainly is in Canada. If you go to the grocery store, you see a lot more than 6% inflation from a year ago. So that's also worrisome, is that their crystal ball seemed a little bit foggy when it came to the inflation number. They seemed to be surprised, and now they're kind of caught a little bit.
Yeah, they being the Democratic administration, probably all of us, March is the cruelest month, don't they say that? And inflation is the cruelest tax, because inflation really hurts people that are not as wealthy as other people. So, and it's everywhere. It goes across the board. So I think they were very surprised at what happened. And part of that came about as a result of the supply chains. A lot of things that are happening in the political economy. And I thought today we'd talk more about politics, because it is a mess down here. Politics are going to have a big effect on the economy. But let's go back to interest rate increases. Interest rate increases, if they're done properly, they'll be significant, and they will put us into a recession. So, you can't have one without the other, unfortunately. That's certainly what happened in the 80s. We lived that, and we lived with low interest rates for quite a long time. We're going to see that if they go forward with what they plan, then we'll see that kind of thing here. Unfortunately, you're right. They really do need the Fed and the Treasury and the United States economy needs inflation to get rid of some of the trillions of dollars of printing that they either have done or plan to do in the next year or so.
It's an interesting time, though, back to the politics side, because politics have been the main feature of, whether it's policy to do the fiscal policies you're seeing in Canada. We spent $500 billion of borrowed money in 2 years. The U.S., you're talking $6 trillion over a couple of years with, as you say, more proposals to come. So you can't talk about this without talking about politics. And of course, just to remind everyone, you've got midterm elections coming up. And a lot of the prognosticators are now saying it looks like the Republicans could come roaring back in the House and in the Senate, but based primarily on people looking and saying, I don't like where my cost of living's going.
Yes. Politics sort of almost trump the economy now. People are frustrated with what's happening with the Biden administration, and it almost looks like it's being done on purpose. I mean, all of the things that they do. There's a huge disparity. This is almost like the Civil War in this country. There's a divisiveness in the country. We're not coming together at all. There's a strong left-wing entity in the country, and there's a right wing. And if it hadn't been for a couple of Democratic senators, we would be printing $7 or $10 trillion over the next decade. So it's very, very divisive. We're not coming together as a country, and we will see. I think we will see the Republicans take the Congress and probably take the Senate as well, take the House and the Senate. But the Republicans seem to lose their nerves a lot, and it's not the case with the Democrats. So this country has gone woke, and this is going to get a lot worse politically before it's over with, unfortunately.
Let's come back to investors for a second, and we look at this kind of an environment. Obviously you don't want to have your own personal finances with a floating rate interest rate. If rates are about to go up. As you say, right. You're worried about the stock market in light of that, and we've already seen indications of that. What would be, and I know this is very broad advice, we don't know individual circumstances to be sure, but just as a broad brush, what kind of things would you advise people to at least have a look at with their financial advisor? Well,
first, we always talk about this, but first first and foremost, diversification. I mean, there are not a lot of ways in a bear market to really do things other than to be diversified. And I think diversification now with your financial advisor goes as far as foreign exposure, foreign exposure to that your portfolio should have. But I'm still a large cap guy, and I'm basically still a low PE guy. I grew up with David Dreaman and other guys like that I knew well and worked with. So I think you want to have liquid stocks. You want to be looking for deals now, and I think this market's going to over the next few months give us some new valuations to think about. I think the high tech stuff is gone too far, so I would be lighter there, and I would stay with sort of a 60-40 mix, which is what we've always talked about in the past, equities to debt as well. So, but I'm not a financial advisor myself, but that's how I manage my portfolio. These things come around. We'll see how this works. We'll see if we have an economy that slows down with these interest rate increases. That remains to be seen. There is a lot of liquidity out there on the sidelines because we have printed. Everybody got checks down here. Everybody got a check for $1,400 or $600 in 2020, and so that's sitting out there waiting for investing now.
One of the things that, of course, has been difficult is that the indexes aren't necessarily representative of people's portfolios when you've got them so dominated by, Apple, by Amazon, by Microsoft, in the group. We always talk about the group, Alphabet too. And we've already seen some of these corrections. And I think your point's an interesting one where if you've got money on the sidelines, if you're patient, you could see more opportunity. I mean, maybe the highest profile fund in the States is ARK ETF, with Kathy Woods. Yep. And, that was very high techy. And it's down about, I think the last time I looked, it was about 45%. It's the biggest drawdown they've had. And there's an example beyond the indexes to look at that side of the market you're warning about, that, it's the old what comes up once goes down. And so that's obviously key to keep in mind.
Well, I think the meme stocks, all of the Bitcoins and all of those things, they haven't proven themselves. They're bubbles. I mean, we have been living in part of the economy here as a classic bubble, and it looked like it would go on forever. That bubble is in the process of bursting, and with higher interest rate is going to burst. So there was some commentary this morning on Fox News down here about the fact that we can't get people to take jobs because a lot of people have decided to retire because they've been in this bubble economy and they think it's going to last forever, and it's not. It's not. So, we're going to see things come down to earth pretty quickly in those sectors. The ARK people, for example, and the people that are dealing with Bitcoin and think that it's going to go to $100,000 a coin and so on. It's ridiculous. It's a bubble. And then we've had bubbles for 1,000 years, and they go on, and people never recognize them until it's too late. So, but I do think there's some good yield. One stock that I do own quite a bit of is Newmont, and it's been killed. I mean, but it's got a 4% safe dividend yield. So I'd be looking for yield. I'd be looking for safe yield, and there's a fair amount of it around out there in the equity market, actually. And that, a dividend yield gives you a little bit of protection in a bear market.
Let me get a couple more things in quickly here. One is you've just alluded to Newmont as a blue chip gold mine, for example. Your quick take on gold, and then your quick take on commodities in general, because I'm going back a couple of years and you were keen on the commodity cycle, obviously paid off. So a quick take on gold and a quick take on commodities.
Gold and silver, I think, are stores of value. I think they've proven to be stores of value. You should have some in your portfolio. You should have it either have it in a vault in the bank, or you should have it as a good stock, the Barrick stock, a Newmont stock, and some other ones. And there are some good there's some good silver miners as well out there, and guys like Sprott in Toronto is taking on. I understand he's got a lot of action going on in Newfoundland now. That's the next thing. So I think gold should be in the portfolio. It doesn't have to be 100%. It could be a nice diversifier, and there's yield there. There's some nice yield there. And I'm sorry, and
for the commodities in general.
The market in general?
The commodities market in general.
Oh, the commodity market. Look, we're going to get over this. It might take a year. It might take 2 years to get things right again. But if they go forward and do the things that we sing, now the green thing is a little bit more going to be a little bit more difficult. But we're going to need copper. We're going to need zinc. We're going to need lead. My son does a lot of work in lithium, and if we're going to go electric, we're going to have a lot more lithium, and we're going to have also investing in supply chains is interesting now to watch who's putting together the supply chains and what are the components. So I think a 10 or 15% weighting in the commodities is a good thing. And I think you'll see some pullback in these things. Gold is just this week has come down a lot. So I think gold and silver and some of the industrial commodities like copper are good places to have some exposure.
As usual, just fabulous to get a chance to chat with you, Dr. Michael Berry. Thank you for finding time, and all the best for 2022.
And to you too. We'll talk again. Always good to talk to you, Mike.
One of the big stories of the last several years has been the push toward electric vehicles. I mean, governments had created these incentive packages with tax breaks, et cetera. You hear about it in the news all the time. And of course, the big winner has been Tesla, at least as far as market share is concerned. But my goodness, is that field ever becoming more crowded here? I want to bring Michael Levy in to chat about this because I know, Mike, you and I have been talking about this, but it's one of the things that happens if you're perceived to be the innovator, and I think Tesla is in this regard, but all of a sudden, everybody strikes up and says, I want a piece of that action.
And boy, do they ever. And Volkswagen and Toyota are the latest to the table, and they're coming for Tesla. There's just no doubt, Mike. They're laying out $170 billion worth of investments to stay on top of the car market. Obviously, Toyota is one, if not the world leader, and Volkswagen is right there beside them with all their brands. They each sold 10 times the number of cars than Tesla did last year. Leading the way, VW has 11 brands, manufactures in 120 different locations in different countries, and has, catch the number, the size of employees, number of employees is bigger than the population of Detroit. 675,000 employees, and they sell $280 billion worth of cars a year, and they've dedicated $100 billion US to EVs and software development in the next 5 years. Toyota revealed 11 new electric vehicles recently and plans to roll out 30 new EVs by the end of the decade. They're aiming to sell 3.5 million EVs annually by 2030. That's almost double a target, Mike, set just 7 months earlier.
Yeah, and of course, there's General Motors. I mean, they have been talking about an all-electric future for the last year or so. I just saw Ford Motor Company with their, I think it's the 150 truck, Lightning it's called. They just keep on making announcements. Oh, we thought we'd only have to do this many in production. They've now about quadrupled it over the last year because the demand is so high. So you name it, they're coming after the electric vehicle market.
Well, they are. And Tesla, I'm going to say only made because everything's relative to the other guy. It's actually very impressive. Tesla closed out the year 2021. They're delivering over 936,000 vehicles. That's up almost 90% from the year previous, Mike. So they are really going at it. But analysts are saying that Tesla's EV market share in the U.S. is going to fall by 20% by 2025 from slightly more than 50% today. And that's because the big guys are going to be able to mass produce. They have the billions and billions of dollars to do it. Not that Tesla is short of funds, because Tesla is a huge stock with huge resources, but they don't have the facilities, they don't have the people, they don't have the different countries in which to produce the EVs. So it's going to be a real brawl.
Yeah, and as you say, Tesla's ramping up. I know in China they're ramping up, et cetera. But it's right across the board. Maybe not a surprise, but it's the numbers that you've just been relating. You know, Volkswagen, Toyota laying out 170 billion worth of investments to get into this, GM, Ford, plus all these startups like Rivian, you know, the truck manufacturer.
Yeah.
You know, I looked at, by the way, that was a cautionary tale, is don't jump on board when you see one of these high flyers right away, you know, and it's still yet to produce, you know, being in meaningful production. I looked at that stock drop, but that's another story. But you have all these new players like Rivian coming into the marketplace too. So it is getting crowded. And I think it's just an endorsement that we are going to be driving electric vehicles.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. But Mike, this brings to mind quickly an anecdote. Is number one, and this is serious, where are you going to charge all these electric vehicles? You can't be running home every time. So they're going to have charging stations everywhere, and not just everywhere mainstream, everywhere. You're going to have charging stations. So my question is, you're in Key West, Florida. There is a hurricane. There are floods. The roads close, and everybody's in a lineup to get out of the way of the hurricane, and everybody runs out of power.
These are some of the huge questions that we're facing. And I mean, the other one, of course, we've been talking about and chronicling for well over 2 years on this show. It's why I'm bullish on so many of the commodities, is where you're getting the raw materials, whether you're talking about the infrastructure, as you just alluded to, Mike, or whether you're talking about the manufacturing of batteries, whether you're talking about the car itself. I mean, it's a real issue and a huge challenge going forward, and one that involves geopolitical issues like China with the lithium. So, yeah, I mean, this is not a done story, but I think what you're bringing to the forefront here is that you look at the incredible commitment of cash going forward. It is one that's going to be played out. We'll get a chance to chat about it, but as I say, it's not talking about smooth sailing. It's a huge challenge, but there's more to come. Mike, thanks for taking the time, and have a terrific week.
You too, Mike, and Happy New Year.
Time now for the shocking stat of the week. You know, one of the biggest areas of division, frustration, maybe more anger during the pandemic has been over individual rights versus the right of government to curtail them in the name of public safety. Well, come on, to say it's a hot button issue is hardly an understatement. And by the way, I'm proud of the fact that on Money Talks, before the first lockdown, I asked how far are we willing to go to enforce pandemic restrictions, but we didn't discuss it. For most of us, it's been an education, by the way, in what specifically the Charter of Rights guarantees for individuals. Many of us confuse the difference between the U.S. and its Constitution with Canada and its Charter of Rights. But despite the focus on government power versus individual rights, you know what? As my shocking stat, I was blown away when it was revealed that Public Health Canada had tracked 33 million cell phones during the lockdown in order to track our movements. And no one in the public was aware or consented to their surveillance. And they're not done. Public Health Agency spokesperson stated that the agency is planning to track population movement for roughly the next 5 years, including to address other public health issues, such as, in quotes, other infectious diseases, chronic disease prevention, and mental health, end of quote. Of course, Public Health Canada says it's for our own good because, in quotes, helps to advance public health objectives by informing public health messaging, planning, and policy development, end of quote. Well, on the other hand, you got privacy advocates stating there is nothing to prevent that data from being used for other purposes. The debate's going to be ongoing, but for the moment, come on, 33 million devices were tracked without our knowledge. I find that shocking. Well, at least it is for some of us. Well, we have to look at what's coming on in 2022. Got a great show. I think that's what we're doing here, and we'll continue to do, of course. But I wanted to get Andrew Rulin in with me from Integrated Wealth Management in Calgary. And Andrew, first of all, I'll say I know you're doing a webinar right after the show that's going to start at noon Mountain Time and 11 o'clock Pacific. People can go to mikesmoneytalks.ca and sign in, but you've got to be one of the first 500, by the way, because that's the limit. But so they can do that, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. One of the best things about podcasts is you can access it throughout the week. But if you are listening on Saturday, that webinar is available, as I say, 11 Pacific, noon Mountain. So I won't keep you too long. But Andrew, I want to just talk about first blush. When you think about 2022, what comes to mind?
I think 2022 is going to be the year of the Great Awakening. 2021 was a year of investing in the context of, COVID-19 lockdowns caused by public policy blunders and the Great Reset. But 2022, I think, is the Great Reawakening. Now, that has a social context, which we'll talk to in the webinar as well. But on the investment side of things, it would include things like understanding that inflation is not transitory, it is real and it is persistent, that the government bond market is teetering on the edge of turmoil. We have very skewed equity market fundamentals in a lot of, in a few very powerful, very influential stocks. And of course, there's what Marty calls the political year from hell.
Well, and you talk about, when you look at the market, obviously, it's been a tale of two cities kind of with these big tech dominating. And then you look inside the market and you see a lot of stocks having had a significant decline from their highs, like really a lot of stocks. I think I saw the last number I looked at was 2/3 of all Standard & Poor 500 stocks were below their moving average, below about half of their valuation from a year ago or in the year. So from their all-time highs. Yep. So, there's a lot going on. So where are you defensive and where do you are looking for opportunity?
Well, we have kind of two different approaches for the equity side of things for kind of the main component or what we call the core. We have a growth approach, which is more turnover, more growthy stocks, more momentum based, less concerned with income. And then we have the dividend grower side of things. So it's a different strategy for each. There's a little bit of a rotation into Canada, actually, even on the dividend side of things with some senior producers like, the Suncors and a couple others that are paying a healthy dividend. On the growth side of things, a lot of it is actually shifting, starting to shift to maybe some of the material stocks. So that's, both of those things make the TSX look a little bit more attractive on a relative weighting basis going forward.
Well, it's, and I'm glad you've made that distinction. I probably should have made it in asking the question, but that's an example. Like portfolios aren't a monolith. And of course, depending on one's age and circumstances, that kind of thing. And that's why you go to a professional like Andrew, who tailor makes it to your own circumstances. But that's a great example. X amount of my money is in growth. X amount is going to be more conservative and maybe X amount is uber conservative. That's, a general portfolio approach. And that's, I'd encourage people to think about those kinds of things. Let me tell you, where do you think the biggest opportunity is that maybe isn't fully appreciated? Of course, that's the nature of the big opportunity. People aren't there yet.
Yes, absolutely. Well, actually, when we listened to the World Outlook Conference 2021, to the pre-conference, it confirmed what we were believing was unfolding or about to really take off to the upside, which was the commodity super cycle. And so we moved pretty quickly and we created something called the Core and Explore strategy with one of our portfolio managers in Toronto. And it's a conservative way of playing the commodity super cycle, which we still think has, kind of 12 to maybe 18 or 24 months left to go. But that's where we see actually the biggest upside opportunities. And that would be in kind of four areas. One is in kind of the broad commodity space. And we have an actively managed ETF that we use for that. And it could be long or flat, not short, but long or flat. So they're great at minimizing drawdowns. In the energy space, because of course there's been so much supply destruction while demand has returned. And certainly in uranium stocks, there's a big opportunity because if you want to plug in your car, you got to have nuclear. There's just no getting around the math of that. And the last area is gold stocks, which have actually been the only thing in the Core and Explore portfolio which have not done a positive return. So, Gold managed to hold that 1697 U.S. year-end figure that Marty was talking about. So we're hoping that that maybe as I'll say as crypto perhaps comes under a little bit more scrutiny, and I know that's the pre-conference for the World Outlook Conference, that maybe we might start to see some of that speculative gold bug, anti-government, anti-fiat currency community maybe start to shift back a little bit to the gold stocks.
Let me throw something at you. Again, you're going to do a webinar. It starts, as I say, at 11 o'clock Pacific. And noon at Mountain Time. And you'll get to explore this in more detail. It's 50 minutes. But just very quickly, look at the broad picture. And again, I know it's a generalized question, but where do you think the biggest mistake people make when they look at their portfolios?
Actually, I think the biggest mistake they make is a buy and hold approach. I think that we're going to have to go from kind of the roadhouse brawling skills to being, more like a Bruce Lee in terms of moving very, very nimbly. Buy and hold, I think, is going to be. I think it's been dead for a number of years in many respects, but I think it's going to be even more detrimental going forward. So actually, more than any particular sector or any particular market, I actually think it's the portfolio management strategy that is going to be the biggest determinant of success, relative success in 2022.
Well, as I say, you're going to get a chance to go into that in more depth. The people, I invite you to go to mikesmoneytalks.ca. Right there, you can sign on to the webinar that starts at noon Mountain, 11 Pacific. Andrew, thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure, Mike. Have a great weekend.
It's incredible. We're 1 week into the new year, and already there's plenty of real estate news. I got to get Ozzie Jurek in here right now. Ozzie, I'm going to start with it's the assessment season too, but the bottom line on that is people are finding their property values, the assessed property values have gone way up.
No question about it. And of course, everybody knows our average house price in Vancouver is now over $2 million. So clearly everybody's assessment must have gone up. But we've got to remember, it's really as of July last year. That's when the key date is July the 2nd. So actually it's probably it was less valued in July than it is now. But the big thing is, the question is always, should I dispute my assessment? And it's a relatively easy process to do it.
Well, and again, across the country, different assessment notices, they have different processes, but your point is well taken. People are going to see an assessment. It's going to be up because, as we've been chronicling right from the get-go, this is a real estate market that covered across the country, small town, big centers, obviously. So everyone's going to see a higher assessment. And just a reminder, by the way, Ozzie, as you well know, you have to check, depending on what city you live in. Of course, it's increase in property taxes. I think the worst I've still seen is Vancouver at 6.3%, but it's on that higher assessed value. So it's not just 6.3% compared to last year. It's on an increased assessed value. So it's why people maybe this year especially should be paying attention to these assessment notices.
And it's easily done. You go to BC Assessments, you click on the search button, and it tells you what your assessed value is. But more importantly, and BC Assessment is one of the few assessment authorities where you can actually figure out how they arrived at your assessment. And they arrive at that by looking at past sales. Now that is really a great tool. Now in order to get that, you got to sign in. It's an easy thing. Put in your email address. They will just check that you're actually there and send you a confirmation. And then you put in the password that you have created. And all of a sudden you can find out the last 5 years worth of assessments that you got every year. And then secondly, particularly in an apartment building, you can see all the sales that took place last year up till July and how they compare with your assessment. And that way, if you feel you've been hard done by, you have a way you can discuss with your assessor why you should have an assessment and assessed value.
But of course, we have people listening from across the country, actually internationally too, but the message is still the same. Check your assessed value this year. Check how you might go about disputing it if that's the case. And of course, more people are going to be aware of the increase in what the property tax rate is. So there's a lot in their plate about this. Ozzie, I want to take a quick jump somewhere else. And that's one of the things we've been chronicling is, if you look for where you can tax, where you can get pools of capital, well, of course, whether it's retirement savings, and I would say then housing. So a new proposal for increasing a new tax, for example, on people's homes with an eye, they say, at least to maybe improving affordability. But maybe you could outline it a touch for us.
For 2 years, we've been talking about that. CMHC had commissioned a study. They denied it. We found out later on they had to admit it. And now the study is published. And surprise, surprise, the study is called Generation Squeeze. And this West Coast think tank argues that we need a surtax on the equity of our properties.
Yeah, and as I say, it's no surprise. We've been worried about this. I mean, they've made several shifts anyways, looking at our primary residence, starting with, as you chronicled right at the time, Ozzie, when you sell your primary residence, now you have to, even though it's not taxable, you have to still put it on your tax form. That's just one example that sets it up. Or if I have a carriage house or something that I'm renting out in the property, technically speaking, that should reduce the capital gains exemption.
Yeah, no question. Build a laneway house, you and I have talked about this for years, is really not well for tax planning purposes. Now, this generation squeeze, they came up with several solutions. Some of them are really way out there, like creating a low carbon cooperatives and allow mortgage holders to sell their properties back to some sort of a fund, and then they can sort of keep their mortgage payments capped. None of that will work. But the big one is that they want to put up a tax on properties over 1 million. And they have a range from about 0.2%, always make it seem very low, 0.2% to 1%. When you consider that the average price in Vancouver is 2 million, well, 1% is $2,000. And that's every year that you own a house. So it's cumulative. Very quickly, in 10 years, it goes to 20,000 plus because it's always on the increased value. So kind of an interesting idea.
Well, it's one, though. I mean, it's under the pretense of creating more affordable housing, which I don't understand at all because it increases the cost. It's not just what does it cost me to get into the real estate market. It's also what does it cost me to actually own the home. So property taxes, when we see insurance rates go up or maintenance go up, and things like that. That is also a huge issue is once I'm in the home, if I could afford to be, then I've got a problem. But this is also coming on top of, we're going to get, we've already had a budge up in some mortgage rates, et cetera, big debate about how far interest rates will go. But I just don't see this solving anything other than a cash grab for the government.
Well, the Canadian Taxpayer Federation says, look, we build homes with hammers, not tax hikes. And I would agree with that. Because really, when you take a look at it, we as Canadians, first of all, we have got a great record to pay our mortgage. It's a great thing to create a nest egg for ourselves. We're looking for retirement. Young people go into a house. It's just not a stagnant thing. They add value and do things, and all this becomes a new complicated thing, but it's the thin edge of the wedge. We say it's 0.2. Well, then it'll be 1%. Then it's 2%. Then maybe it's 3%. Now, when you ask the BC government, they already said, look, we need to study this, but we did it already. The NDP put in a proposal on additional school tax over $3 million. And that has raised us a lot of money. So they're not saying they're not going to put it in on February 22nd. They're saying they're studying it. Number one, it's estimated that it raises a tremendous amount of value, but the Tax Federation says the tax revenue generated would cover the spending of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government for less than 5 days. So there we go. But is that then the final goal? No, they wanted to cover for a lot more than that. So expect those rates to go higher. Going capital gains tax exemption.
Well, it's something that we're going to keep an eye on, of course, for people. The other thing, of course, is people buy their homes, make a down payment with after-tax dollars. They pay their mortgage payments with after-tax dollars. They do any maintenance, anything else related to the cost of a home, like property taxes, are done with after-tax dollars. And for some people, they don't think that's enough yet. It's something, as I say, we'll chronicle it, Ozzie. Thanks for cheering me up. I'm just kidding. Happy New Year to you.
And Happy New Year to you and your listeners, Mike. I just want to say, I don't want to brag, but I put together a puzzle in 1 day, and the box said 2 to 4 years.
Ozzie Jurek. I want to go live to the trading desk now with Victor Adair. Vic, we didn't start the new year with a quiet. It didn't come in like a lamb or whatever the old expression was. I mean, there's just lots of stuff to talk about. And I think number one, and we alluded to it a bit with Dr. Michael Berry, is the rise in interest rates. I'm not sure if people grasp what was happening in the bond market.
Yeah, we had a really sharp increase in long yields. For instance, the 10-year Treasury touched 1.8%. We haven't been at those levels since before people started to hear about COVID, January of 2020, and that the move to there was very quick. And I think that's just caused consequences everywhere, whether it's in the currency market, the gold market, and certainly in the stock market with a very sharp rise in interest rates.
And again, I was looking at the 1, 2, 3, and 5-year bond rates, also highest from pre-pandemic levels. So what do you make? What's that telling us? What message was the bond market reacting to?
Well, the bond market, the old thing is that the bond market is way smarter than the stock market. I'm not sure that that's true, but the bond market's maybe less emotional than the stock market. You had last year, for instance, we had just a tidal wave of money come chasing into the stock market. The latest figures here were well over $1 trillion in new cash, and that's more than the amount of new cash that's come into the stock market in more than 20 years. I mean, that's just an astounding wave of money come in. So the stock market was more emotional. And the stock market, let's say, at the extremes, you had companies that weren't really worth anything in terms of old school valuation metrics were getting bid up like crazy. Well, those are the ones that are getting poked in the eye here with this sharp rise in interest rates. I mean, a great example, of course, is ARC, down 50%. And they've got a basket of stocks in there that are not producing any revenue. They're money-losing stocks. But, on a wing and a prayer, people were buying them and they were going up. So that's certainly one of the most obvious impacts of this rise in interest rates. Another one I think that's obvious is that value stocks are getting bid here relative to growth stocks, which is exactly the sort of thing Kevin Muir was talking about on your show a couple of weeks ago, seeing this rotation from these growth stocks that had been bid up to ridiculous levels, in his opinion, and growth was left for dead. So that's been a big turnaround here so far this year.
Well, that's one of the tough things is you're in sort of these parabolic moves that some of these stocks enjoyed. And people ask, well, what do you think about that? Well, because it's not based on fundamentals. It's based on other issues, other concerns. They're not looking and saying, that's a heck of an earnings report they had, a heck of a dividend. They're not doing that kind of stuff. And it's a wonderful, like you just alluded to, you look at the Dow or whatever they're reporting on the Dow or the S&P, and it's off some, not a lot, but off some. And then you look inside and you've got an ETF like ARC, which is sort of became the poster child for the new technology booms. And you look at it's down 45, 50%. That just tells you can't just look at the index number and think you know what's going on inside the market.
Yeah, another example of the drama here, we had Apple become a $3 trillion market cap company this week. But even more flamboyant was Tesla. Tesla shares jumped $150 the first day of the new year here from where they closed last year. I will tell you, go right to the chase here. Elon Musk's personal net worth jumped $34 billion this week and then fell $34 billion this week. I mean, do you think he's dizzy?
I didn't have quite that experience personally when I looked at my portfolio. Hey, I don't want to leave without talking about this side of it. We always talk about you've got an interest rate post and then you've got inflation and you subtract the two and that's called your real interest rates. Like what are you really getting in the interest rate market? So if inflation's running at 6 and I'm getting 2% in my bond, my real interest rate, what I'm really getting is negative 4%. I wanted to talk a little bit about, with rising interest rates, and what that means for gold when you look at the real interest rate story.
Yeah, over, let's say since 2018 in particular, the interest rates going more deeply negative was great news for gold. There was a high correlation there. In the last year, honestly, less so. But what is happening here the last couple of weeks certainly is that interest rates, or the real rate, is becoming less negative. I mean, we're very close to the whole German bond market actually getting back above water, or getting back above the 0 point. So with that going on, with there being real interest rates becoming less negative, all other things being equal, that is not good for gold. I think that the possibility for gold here is that the market has been expecting the American market to increase interest rates while the rest of the world stood still. By the rest of the world, I'm mainly talking Japan and Europe. Well, if in fact, and we've got really rising inflation in Europe, if the ECB and the Bank of Japan also start to even give signs that they're thinking about raising interest rates, that might kind of poke the U.S. dollar in the eye. The U.S. dollar rallied most of last year. And if the U.S. dollar was to weaken for any reason, that would probably be a real lift for the gold market.
Well, that's one of the things that, of course, it feels like every day we get more evidence. And I know you literally, because of your trading all around the world, you're working 7 days a week, but we get more evidence to see which scenarios playing out. And we'll have a chance to do that with the World Outlook Conference, coming up first week of February. And Victor, of course, will be with us online. It's an online event, proved to be one of my best calls of the year, saying, let's stay online. They're going to lock us down somehow again. So that's exactly what we'll be doing. So Victor will be there. We'll get more evidence by then. And all you have to do is go to mikesmoneytalks.ca to look for your ticket, mikesmoneytalks.ca, and then click on events. And you should be going there anyways all the time to get updates. But also you can go this right now, whenever you're listening, just go to victoradair.ca, victoradair.ca. Have a look at some of these charts. He's got, what's happened in the bond market up there, which I think is just an absolute key in this world awash with debt to understand. And Victor, as I say, appreciate you taking the time, appreciate victoradair.ca and bringing us those charts and your analysis there. And we'll talk to you next week.
Mike, it's always fun to talk with you.
Time now for this week's Goofy Award. It was 1 year ago Thursday on January 6th, 2021, a group of protesters stormed the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Certainly a big shock for a great many people. But a shock despite the fact that we had witnessed numerous protests turn violent in the run-up to that event, in the year previous, including those in the name of George Floyd. Come on, we saw the establishment of the state of Chaz in downtown Seattle. We had 100 days of mayhem in Portland. Now, of course, to be sure, swarming the seat of government in the U.S. can be argued to be more significant than the other protests. But shocked? Really shocked? Given what else had been happening in the country? I mean, the mainstream media immediately dubbed it a coup or an insurrection and proceeded to misreport things like a police officer had been beaten to death by protesters, which the officer's own family said was false. The goofy part, though, is that the narrative of an insurrection, assault on democracy, a coup, is still alive and well. Well, why, though? It's because it suits a political agenda. Numerous media outlets still refer to it as a coup attempt, despite the fact that the FBI concluded in August that there was scant evidence that the U.S. Capitol attack was coordinated in any way. It's despite the fact that, there's been 725 people arrested over the last year for participating in the Capitol assault, but no one's been charged with treason or sedition. Well, destruction of government property, yes. Theft, trespassing, list of other offenses, yes. But trying to overthrow the government? No. But as I said, political agendas are at play, and too much of the mainstream media is willing to go along. I mean, it should be very concerning. At least it is for me. Maybe my biggest worry is that the insurrection coup narrative actually provides cover for censorship, especially on social media. The goofy part is that it obscures the bigger picture, though. One that I continue to talk about, I know I do, because it's the most important one to understand, and that is the escalating distrust of government and its institutions. It's the most significant social financial trend of our lifetime, one that continues to this day around the world in the form of protests against government COVID restrictions and mandates. Hey, look at the protests against high fuel prices in Kazakhstan brought down the government. In the case of the Capitol riots, which of course this is egged on by President Trump, there was a clear distrust of the integrity of the electoral process. But what's regularly overlooked is that Democratic supporters felt the same way after the 2016 election. In both cases, polling showed that something over 60% of the losing party supporters questioned the legitimacy of the outcome. Clinton supporters in 2016, Trump supporters in 2020. I mean, anyone want to bet that in 2024, the losing party is going to feel any different? I'd say chances are slim. And by the way, this is a result of the politics of division. And that's why we should pay much closer attention to divisive language used by, for example, leaders like President Biden, who calls this a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Gosh, this last week, France's Emmanuel Macron stated that the 5 million unvaccinated people in France are non-citizens. Prime Minister Trudeau says the unvaccinated are very often misogynistic and racist. Talking like this in a divided society should be of great concern because the politics of division have consequences. So next time, at least there'll be no excuse to be surprised. That's all we have this week, but I want to remind you to go to mikesmoneytalks.ca. You can go there every day as you can to Money Talks tweets. And I'm making a list of all the stories that we put something up on that you don't see in the mainstream media. That's the reason to go. Also, Michael Campbell's Facebook. But also go to mikesmoneytalks.ca. Click on for the World Outlook Conference. We're a month away. And my goodness, have we already kicked it off with a bang with all the things that are changing. I'll give you one hint. The monetary crisis is real. That's been our forecast. It is real. Look what's happening in Ecuador. Look what's happening in Venezuela. Look what's happening in Argentina. We always said it would start in emerging markets. We'll give you updates on that. In the meantime, I hope you have a terrific week.
This is the Money Talks podcast with Michael Campbell, available at mikesmoneytalks.ca or through your favorite podcast subscription service. Join us on Facebook at Michael Campbell's Money Talks and on Twitter at Money Talks Tweet.